I mean, if a person can tell me, and I don't know the answer to this, but if they can tell me, you know, I can take the occasional toke and I won't be high, but I don't know if that's true.
You know, mankind wants more and we want that euphoric effect, and so the THC levels have been increased dramatically.
The countdown to legalizing recreational pot is on. What will it mean for Canadians, our communities, and our teenagers? How will it be monitored? How will we know what's in that little mind-numbing joint? Sheldon Neal finds out at the In Doubt Let's Talk Marijuana Forum. I'm Lorna Dueck.
I'm Sheldon Neal in Vancouver, British Columbia.
And this is Context. The federal government is following through on its promise to legalize recreational use of marijuana. In light of the many voices opposed, along with those in agreement with the move, our Sheldon Neal went to Canada's weed capital and a youth forum to find out more. Here's Sheldon.
Researchers from Simon Fraser University and the University of British Columbia report that more than 336,000 British Columbians use pot, estimating the industry is worth between $443 million and $564 million a year. The Liberal government plans to make good on their election promise, legalizing the recreational drug use of pot. But how will Canada turn the corner on legalizing recreational drug use? Are we on the brink of the Wild Wild West, anything goes? Or is it just a technicality, a government regulation that won't change anything? There's no better place to get a sense of what that answer might be than right here in British Columbia. Today on Context, I'll visit several places across this great province to get a sense of the pulse on pot here. Canadians across the country are divided on the issue of pot legalization. I went in search of what British Columbians are thinking.
I don't know, everyone does it, so it might as well be legal.
I just think it's like a necessary progression.
I think it's about time, at least it becomes a taxable base, and all the workers, they're legal now. They'll be paying into CPP, into income tax.
I can't help but wonder what turning the corner on legalizing recreational drug use will look like for the most vulnerable. I went to Vancouver's Lower East Side, known for communities of people suffering from drug abuse, mental illness, poverty, and homelessness. I caught up with Matt Smedley, an inner-city pastor and CEO of Mission Possible.
So in this neighborhood of nearly 20,000 people, over half of those individuals are living in poverty. We see a lot of those individuals have been affected by drug use, and you know that takes a long-term toll on individuals. Where we intersect with people is really those who are coming out of recovery programs, those who are have been struggling with mental health issues and are looking to take steps forward, and we provide an opportunity for them to move back into employment. Where some of our social enterprises intersect is we're out in the city, you know, every day on foot, and coming across individuals who are in really desperate situations, have seen the effects of addiction take a tremendous toll, especially with the current opioid crisis. It takes a toll both on those individuals as well as the first responders and those, you know, who are out in the front lines really trying to save lives.
Who is most at risk as we turn the corner on pot legalization for recreational use in this country?
My hope would be that those who are most at risk would be those who are illegally selling drugs in the black market, that we would see that diminish. I think there's certainly potential for more open marijuana use that may draw in those who aren't currently using it for recreational purposes, but my hope is that would the pros are going to outweigh those cons, and we'll actually see the structure that's put in place for legalization to both educate and help diminish, and through some other interventions be able to reduce some of those risks.
What do you say to people who say, you know what, recreational pot use, it's no big deal, it's cool, I can get my freedom, it's something I do for fun, social, no one really gets hurt? What do you say to those, especially from your point of view and those who you work with every day? I
mean, for me, I see the risks, you know, for individuals using, you know, whether it's alcohol, it's drugs, you know, a number of different things that can, you know, have psychoactive effects, can change the way that we think and the way that we act, and can have really have some serious downsides, both for their health and for their mental health, especially. In this neighborhood, there's so many people who are battling mental illness, and marijuana has psychoactive effects that can increase the mental health challenges that people are experiencing. And we've seen, people who have actually ended up in the downtown east side because of those effects, ended up with severe mental health issues and lost jobs, kicked out of school, things that happen because of that. And so there's certainly downsides to the recreational use.
Next on my journey, it's time to speak to local businesses that are getting pot into the hands of users. Dispensaries. BC's Solicitor General outlined details about how recreational pot will be sold in BC. The system will mirror alcohol in some ways. Both private and public stores will be allowed to sell once federal laws change. Illegal dispensaries throughout BC will have to apply to the provincial liquor agency for a license. But will dispensary culture comply? And what about health risks and the right education surrounding these dispensaries? Meet Jeremy Jacob, owner of Village Bloomery. I spoke to him about what safe sale of recreational pot looks like as Canada prepares to turn the corner.
Now, from a public safety perspective, there are many decisions still left to be made, and the province, of course, of BC is waiting for federal regulations on cultivator licensing. We're talking seed-to-sale tracking and packaging. My question is, what types of federal regulations do you want to see?
Well, at the federal level, we're happy to see the inclusion of micro licenses. BC's cannabis industry is made of a lot of mom and pop, smaller producers and processors, and there hasn't been a place for them until now, so we're happy to see the federal government making room. We just need to get more clarity on what their transition is going to be, and when those rules come out, we'll have a better understanding. At the federal level also, for patients, we need better access. The Supreme Court said that dispensaries are the heart of access. Every other legal cannabis jurisdiction in North America provides storefront dispensaries for patients. We don't have that in Canada, and it's something that I think is very important. That personal connection is critical for people coming to a new source of wellness in cannabis and looking for information.
Now, most provinces have decided against allowing, liquor and cannabis to be sold together. But opponents to this say, liquor stores are well positioned to provide safe and, of course, reliable access to cannabis because the province will allow, and I want to make sure I get this right, cannabis stores to be located adjacent to alcohol selling establishments. What are your thoughts on this, and help me unpack this all?
Co-location of cannabis with alcohol has never been done in any existing jurisdiction. So the Canadian provinces that are allowing it, or should I say considering to allow it, because I hope they will change their direction, they're going to be forging new territory. There's no evidence to say that it's detrimental because no one's done it before. So why would we be the first? And one of the key goals of the Cannabis Act is to protect our youth. Putting cannabis and alcohol together greatly increases the risk for intoxication. And I think youth have a difficult enough time navigating alcohol on its own. Putting cannabis and alcohol together is really going to send a mixed message and compromise some of the most at-risk Canadians, which is our youth.
How does your dispensary work to ensure people who come in to purchase, to buy, are properly educated on proper use?
Something that we really focus on here is when people are looking for a recommendation, we don't give straight answers because everyone's different. We have something called an endocannabinoid system that's like a fingerprint, so everyone's different. One of the things that we do is we educate them about some of the potential benefits. We give them the option to look at different products that have worked for others, and they get as much education as they can to make a choice that's going to work for them. As someone who does believe that in the existence of God put this plant here. This plant has so many benefits for us. And the harm reduction benefits we talked about, the benefits to improve your health and wellness with a natural substance. So I think that shedding a lot of the stigma is going to be important. A lot of what we as a society have been conditioned to believe is part of the whole reefer madness phenomenon, which was really a fraud. With the light now being shone on cannabis and with legalization upon us and more people looking at it, we're going to see a huge shift in the way people look at this plant.
Coming up, are millennials and baby boomers divided on legalizing recreational pot? Sheldon Neal visits In Doubt's Let's Talk Marijuana Forum to find out. I'm Lorna Duick, and you're watching Context.
Voters turning their outrage into online worldwide trends.
Quebec has an interesting relationship with race and religion.
We'll never arrest our way out of this problem.
I guess the politics ahead of the people on the front lines is more concerning.
It's too dangerous for us to go over to Syria right now.
Let's get back to Vancouver now with Sheldon Neal's look into a province wrestling for the best way forward on legalizing recreational pot.
With the countdown to the end of prohibition on recreational drug use looming, an important detail that can't be ignored is how this all impacts its medicinal use and the medical marijuana industry. The Liberal government proposed suggested plans to tax medical marijuana like it would recreational, this making the medical cannabis industry a source of big money for the government and distributors. According to the Mackey Research Capital Corporation, registered marijuana patients are expected to hit 630,000 in Canada, or 1.7% of the population by 2024. That many patients would project the medical market to be between $1.9 and $2.6 billion. Rielle Kapler is a professor at the University of British Columbia. She studies the effects of medicinal cannabis and healthy policy. I spoke with her about what the legalization of recreational drug use will look like moving forward.
For starters, it really needs to come from a public health perspective, and that is what's happening. So we're off to a good start with that. So from a public health perspective, we want to make sure that people have the education that they need to use cannabis safely and effectively, that they have access to the kinds of products that they need, both in terms of quality control and also knowing what kind of products they're getting in terms of the different strains that have different effects, how to use, for example, edibles in a safe way. So a situation where, unlike in a criminalized environment, we couldn't really talk about it, or we could, but we weren't officially talking about it. Now we can talk about it and provide the kind of health promotion kind of education that needs to come with it.
In your estimates, do you believe the Liberal government has done enough to ensure the proper checks and balances are in place as we move closer and closer towards legalization?
I do think they're being ambitious, but I do think that they're being really thorough. They've dedicated a lot of their energy and capacity and time to it. So a lot of the staff are working on it full time, and I think they're doing it really thoroughly. So, in terms of having some basic standards that apply to the whole country, they've done that, the things that they think are most important, with some minimums in terms of age and different things like that, which might even be overdoing it. But then they've left a lot to the different provinces and municipalities, which I think is also really important, because there's different, different cultures, different perspectives on that.
Now, the legalization of cannabis and its rollout across the country will, of course, vary from province to province and territory in terms of determining how it will be used and sold. My question to you is, what policy details unique to BC must be addressed ahead of legalization?
It's all kind of happening in tandem. So we haven't even really finalized the act at the federal level hasn't been passed. It's still in Senate and being discussed there. And there's some policy, regulations that are being drafted as well that are kind of contingent on how that goes. And then all the different provinces are looking at what's been shown to them before and going ahead and working on it to the extent that they can, and that's trickling down to the municipalities. And in each province has kind of come out with something slightly different to meet their needs. So it's a great policy experiment. In BC, I think what has come clear is that they're trying to, it seems like they're trying to incorporate as much of the kind of small producers as possible, the micro producers, and that's something that the government has said in their regulations that they're looking at, making sure that there's a category for micro producers. And I think that everyone needs to know, before it can happen, everyone really needs to know some of those finer details. So there's a lot of people out there, hedging their bets or trying to move forward so that it can all come together at the right time based on what they know, but they don't necessarily know exactly enough details yet.
What is no secret concerning marijuana are the health risks associated with high marijuana use and this is particularly the case among younger population groups. Health Canada announced plans to put together a campaign warning youth about the risks, setting aside $9.6 million toward public education. The campaign would target youth aged 13 to 17 and young adults 18 to 24, including parents and teachers. Dr. Lucinda McQuarrie is a family doctor practicing in BC. She'll be a featured speaker at a local event in Surrey, BC called Let's Talk Marijuana. There she'll be speaking on health risks to cannabis use. I caught up with her before the event to chat about just that.
Well, let's start here. Is marijuana bad for you?
It's a really difficult question to get a straight answer to, because a lot of the research out there can side in the yes and the no categories. I think it depends on why you might be using it. Ultimately, when you look at the risk profile, certainly there's much greater potential for side effects, and that's just because the therapeutic window and the uncertain dosing is so narrow that it's difficult to really know what you're getting when you take it.
I want to read something. Cannabis remains the drug of choice for Canadians aged 15 to 24, but teens face greater health risks than adults. Unpack the risks comparatively between teens and adults.
The biggest risk to teens is really mental health. Your brain's continuing to develop until age 25. Some of the most critical development in terms of critical decision making kind of peak during that time. And so marijuana does have the effect of changing coping mechanisms. 1 in 6 adolescents who starts using marijuana develops an addiction to marijuana.
What's in marijuana? I mean, it seems like users are trying to find some type of a balance between THC levels that really provide the high and CBD that can somewhat mitigate some of them, or it's thought to mitigate some of the negative effects associated that can happen with high TH exposure, including anxiety. We're talking paranoia, psychosis. So is it really about finding that balance between THC and CBD? And if we find that balance, hey, all is well, we're free to go forward?
It is interesting. I think God did it right the first time, and that man has changed it, right? So my understanding is that the original marijuana natural form has 1-to-1 ratios of THC, which is the mind-altering substance, and the cannabidiol, which has some of the beneficial effects, and they offset each other. And so traditionally, the original, when people make reference to it being like a weed growing in some parts of the world, well, you know what? It's a 1-to-1 ratio, and so it has some of that calming effect without the high. And so, but mankind wants more, and we want that euphoric effect. And so the THC levels have been increased dramatically in the kind of newer cultivated breeds for recreational purposes.
Talk to me a little about controlled dosing. Does that make engaging with marijuana safer?
You got to look at the motives and the long-term risks. Marijuana use disorder is a psychiatric diagnosis where people continue to use despite negative outcomes and kind of oblivious to the effects of those outcomes. And so, yeah, what's the motive? And really, my question would be, what is the better alternative? How can you de-stress a healthy way?
Coming up, are millennials and baby boomers divided on legalizing recreational pot? Sheldon Neal visits In Doubt's Let's Talk Marijuana forum to find out. Whether it's marijuana, alcohol, or other drugs, substance use can cause inner conflict. How does a person's faith impact the recreational use of marijuana? Our Sheldon Neal continues his journey in British Columbia to find out. I'm Lorna Duick, and you're watching Context.
Voters turning their outrage into online worldwide trends.
Quebec has an interesting relationship with race and religion.
We'll never arrest our way out of this problem.
I guess the politics ahead of the people on the front lines is more concerning.
It's too dangerous for us to go over to Syria right now.
We joined forces on this special BC Bud Show with Isaac Dagno of In Doubt. Isaac works with young people in BC and started the Let's Talk Marijuana Forum for the tough questions. Here's Sheldon with his conclusion of his findings at the forum and the spiritual side of what legalizing pot means for Canadians. I'll be back with my wrap coming up.
I'm here in Surrey, BC, just about 45 minutes outside Vancouver. And the crowds of concerned, interested, and passionate attendees are here to learn and ask questions about marijuana. But this forum is a little different. This forum is put together by those who lean on a higher power, God. And their big question, what is the Christian perspective on marijuana? Meet Isaac Dagno, one of the organizers behind this event, Let's Talk Marijuana, a forum put together by In Doubt, an organization, the mission to help people solidify their views on life, faith, and culture.
Is there a generational divide concerning the legalization of recreational drug use and its dangers?
I think that there is this sort of majority throughout generations of different demographics that have had this general sense that the legalization of recreational marijuana is not the best thing, I would say, overall. But I think now there is a slight generational divide, at least in the 21st century, coming up now 2015, 16, 17, 18, where more of the, I would say, 20s, 30s, 40s kind of generation are now beginning to say, hey, I think there can be good uses for this, whereas the generational divide would be quite large from, you know, their parents, 50, 60, 70, things like that. So,
should Christians smoke marijuana? Why or why not?
Recreationally, I don't see that adding up to the Bible's take on sobriety and not being drunk and being aware.
Did your parents smoke marijuana?
You know, they did. They actually did. And my dad for many years. Mom, not so much. She wasn't as addicted, but there's addiction in my family for marijuana use. So yeah.
Is there a stigma concerning marijuana use among your age group?
There is. There totally is. Because like I said kind of at the beginning, growing up in elementary school and high school, I just graduated high school in 2010, and even then we were being told that marijuana is a quote-unquote gateway drug to other drugs, and that was all being told. Those are the presentations that were going on at that time. So the people that were smoking pot in high school, they had a reputation as being the rebels. They were the rebels. So that still carries on to this day.
I asked young people attending this event their thoughts after the forum wrapped.
For me, I actually don't know where I stand. I know for a fact that biblically I stand in terms of I don't want to be in a part where I'm part of something addictive. And I know where I stand in my faith, but I want to learn in terms of how can I approach this in a more cultural way.
I'm glad to hear different opinions. Even though they hold also to a stand of recreation should be at least very wary of. But I like hearing the different approaches to understanding why, from a biblical perspective to a cultural view, and of course a medical viewpoint as well.
Meet Dr. John Neufeld, a keynote speaker at the Let's Talk Marijuana Forum. He is also the daily Bible teacher of Back to the Bible Canada, an organization whose mission is to teach biblical principles in relevant ways to people. He says the Bible is clear on whether smoking marijuana is right.
Well, Sheldon, in a one-word answer, it doesn't address smoking marijuana. But then again, the Bible doesn't address a lot of stuff. For instance, the Bible doesn't say you can't poke yourself in the eye with a sharp pencil. Doesn't mean it's a good idea. And the Bible might have a lot of wisdom in regard to some of the decisions that we make. In fact, wisdom is really what we should be talking about.
What do you say to Christians who believe, because they are indeed out there, that, you know what, smoking marijuana, to me, does not compromise our relationship with God?
Well, I would always say, if you're simply asking the question of what can I get away with, I think you're already on the wrong track. I think the real question is what I'm doing to the glory of God? Can I rejoice and give God thanks for the activity that I'm involved in? And so, since I can't give thanks for intoxication. For instance, I would have to say, therefore, I can't do that to the glory of God. And so I would start there. I mean, if a person can tell me, and I don't know the answer to this, but if they can tell me, you know, I can take the occasional toke and I won't be high, but I don't know if that's true. So, I mean, that's a question I leave to the person who really wants to ask the question, how can I live to the glory of God?
What insight does a relationship with God offer to a black and white issue such as the legalization of recreational drug use?
Well, there's a couple of questions I think we need to address. First of all, what is the relationship of the believer to the culture as a whole? I mean, there are a lot of things in culture that culture embraces that we as believers say, you know, the way of God is just opposed to that. So I think there's always this radical element of being a believer. We're never going to embrace the culture as a whole. We're always going to be at this, you know, this rocky relationship with the culture in which we live. And we just have to get used to that. It's part of discipleship. So I would argue that that's at least a starting point. And I would argue the other starting point is always this understanding that the long-term consequences of my action form the whole basis for my faith. I mean, I might say to myself, look, if I rob a bank, I might have short-term advantages, but in the end, I'm going to stand before the bar of God's justice. So all Christians ask themselves, where will this thing lead me in the end? That's a fundamental Christian question.
What do you say to Christians who say, you know what, you're just simply out of touch?
Well, we may be out of touch with the values of this culture, so I'm ready to accept that. But I would want to push back on that. See, here's what I'd like to say. Because we're just coming to the place of legalization now, the longitudinal studies in terms of the effects of marijuana have not yet been done. See, we're kind of like where we were at when smoking was first practiced. We don't yet know what all the consequences are going to be, but we're going to know. And so I would just simply urge caution and a great deal of wisdom in moving forward. I think that's what being in touch with my own future is all about.
Well, thank you, Sheldon. One more idea. Let's imagine marijuana through the discussion Jesus had on legalization in the Bible chapter of Mark 7. I picture Jesus holding up a joint and saying, hey, anything can be legal. It's what comes out of your heart that will affect your actions. Love the Lord your God in all you smoke. So wrestle with how recreational marijuana use will affect your heart and actions. In the debate of his day over legalization, Jesus said products are not the problem. Rather, Jesus gave 12 behaviors that stink before God. And if you're interested in being in a relationship with God, behavior does matter. So with marijuana use, we have to ask, what will it cause in my mind and actions? Why am I doing this? That's the big deal before God. How you behave with or without marijuana matters to God because God wants to see you navigate the best life. That's God's promise. Okay, we'll take the next round on the Facebook comments. So until next week, I'm Lorna Duick. Thanks for watching. I'm Lorna Duick, and you're watching Context.
Voters turning their outrage into online worldwide trends.
Quebec has an interesting relationship with race and religion.
We'll never arrest our way out of this problem.
I guess the politics ahead of the people on the front lines is more concerning.
It's too dangerous for us to go over to Syria right now.
This is real, isn't it? We could be looking at another Rwanda.
God gave us this amazing place, and what we are doing to it is a sin.
Well, this is an issue our next guest is an expert on.
I think it's going to be very difficult for the province to follow these rules.
What is the standard that the church asks?
And he said, God's got you. You are protected.
How does that get decided, what the Pope will address? Joining me now is Wilma Dirksen.
What you're talking about here is the treatment of women in media and entertainment.
Bad behavior, is it out of control?
Join tonight's important discussion.